Welcome to Pop Crime TV's The Outlier Podcast. I'm Lauren Conlin, and as many of you know, I've been covering the United States versus Sean Combs trial, and I have not missed a day yet. So let's recap Week 2, Day 6 through 9, and Week 2 of this federal sex trafficking and racketeering case, let me tell you, has been packed with some dramatic testimonies. During Week 2, we heard from Cassie Ventura's former best friend, Diddy's assistants, or former assistants, a male escort named the Punisher, a forensic psychologist, and even Kid Cudi himself. And for those of you unfamiliar with Kid Cudi, his real name is Scott Mescudi. He previously dated Cassie Ventura. He is a rapper, a hip-hop artist, and an actor, and man, he garnered some crazy media attention last week when he testified. But let's start with Monday, May 19th. Monday started with a noticeably upbeat Diddy. He walked into the courtroom. He hugged his lawyers, Alexandra Shapiro and Mark Agnifilo, and then they huddled to discuss some witness testimony, specifically some testimony that they wanted struck. And at one point, and by the way, this is before the jury walked in, but at one point, Agnifilo said something along the lines of, this case is becoming based on gossip, and he's bringing up different witnesses like a chef who's expected to testify in the next coming weeks, and this chef claimed that she was assaulted by Diddy at one point during her tenure, and Agnifilo argued, where is this in connection to the indictment? This has nothing to do with racketeering, this alleged assault. And the government fired back, insisting that the chef is a victim of forced labor, tying it to their broader case. And these are the types of discussions that are going on before the jury comes in every morning: evidentiary discussions, witness discussions, etc. So, okay, then when that was over, we got back into Dawn Richard's testimony. And this was her finishing her direct examination. She had started it previously the Friday before. And as a refresher, she is a former member of Danity Kane and Diddy Dirty Money. So she dropped a bombshell about an incident involving Cassie Ventura, kind of known as the skillet incident. So just as a recap, Dawn testified that after witnessing this violent episode between Diddy and Cassie, both Diddy and Harve Pierre, who is another figure in Diddy's circle, he was a former Bad Boy executive, threatened her and Kalina Harper, her other bandmate, at 2 different times. And the most chilling part, according to Dawn Richard, was that after Diddy kind of said, you know, this was passion, Cassie's fine, what you witnessed was passion, he said, if you tell, people go missing. Now, the defense just did not let that slide. Diddy's attorney, Nicole Westmoreland, handled the cross-examination, and she pointed out that in 7 prior conversations that Dawn Richard had with the government, she never mentioned this whole people go missing threat. And Dawn was shown transcripts of those interviews, and her response was a little bit shaky. She said, I mean, I don't know, there was a note taker there, but I don't know why I didn't say it. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what she said. And she admitted that her memory has changed over the years, which the defense really seized on. And they were kind of just like, okay, so you're sitting here saying that you are scared of him, you received death threats from him, but you forgot to mention this death threat 7 times when talking to the government. Now, the government jumped in on redirect, really trying to clean this up. They got Dawn Richard to say that her memories had been suppressed because of the trauma. You know, she was trying to keep these as far away from her brain as possible, compartmentalize, push them down, but these interviews with the government helped her recover the memories by just talking through her experiences. And the defense, they really weren't buying it. They showed her a transcript again from April or May of 2025, which was her last meeting with the government. And this is where she included the whole people go missing threat. And so the defense argued again. So you only remembered this alleged threat on the 8th meeting. And then they called her out on a statement from her civil lawsuit where she claimed that Diddy pulled Cassie out of a car by her hair, dragged her onto the grass with lots of witnesses present. And Dawn actually said, "Oh no, that was a miscommunication with my lawyers. The lawyers actually messed up on that." But the government during redirect came back and said, "Well, Dawn, isn't it true that you were actually thinking of another violent incident? So this wasn't just entirely made up." But I mean, if you could sort of picture yourself as a juror, I think that maybe they could have been questioning some of her credibility at that point. And that was just the defense's entire purpose in poking all of these holes in her statements and some of the inconsistencies. Now, Dawn also testified that she worked with Diddy from 2004 to 2009 with Danity Kane, and then from 2009 to 2011 with Dirty Money, leaving in 2011. So she described how Diddy would FaceTime her from time to check in after 2011. And she said that she learned the best way to keep him kind of at arm's length was to be polite and cordial. But then the defense pushed back and said, "Well, didn't you call him first and try to work with him a few times after he left or after you left?" And Dawn Richard had to admit that, yes, she did initiate communication once or twice. And the government countered on redirect, eliciting her to say that she only reached out because Kalina Harper, her bandmate from Dirty Money, really wanted her to. And then things got a little spicy between Dawn Richard and Nicole Westmoreland, the defense attorney. At one point, Westmoreland said something like, "You were very successful with Danity Kane and Dirty Money. You sold all of these albums. And no offense," like she actually said, "no offense, but you haven't sold nearly as many albums since." And Dawn kind of shot back, "I am successful." So that was a little bit tense, but it was it was definitely something that kept your attention in the courtroom. But something very shocking to me was a celebrity name that Dawn Richard dropped. She claimed that Usher, yes, the Usher, witnessed Diddy punch Cassie in the stomach at a dinner in LA. Now, those were not her exact words, but she did describe a dinner. Let's say there were 8 to 10 people there. Usher was one of them. So it sounded to me and to a lot of the people in the courtroom that Usher would have witnessed this stomach punch because Dawn Richard witnessed it and Kalina Harper witnessed it and others witnessed it. So Cassie left this dinner very embarrassed, and on the way home, Dawn Richard was in the car with them, and she testified that Diddy choked Cassie on the way home. And the government made a point when she would discuss a lot of these things that were happening with Cassie or even with her. They would say, "Now, which of Mr. Combs' employees were there?" And I feel like they had been doing that a lot, trying to show a pattern of staff witnessing or enabling Diddy's behavior. And Dawn would confirm most of the time that a bodyguard or assistant was present for a lot of these assaults or a lot of these incidents. But again, we don't know if Usher necessarily saw this incident with his own eyes, but man, his name being dropped definitely turned some heads in the courtroom. And Dawn Richard also corroborated earlier testimony about Diddy's Louis Vuitton med bag, saying that it contained drugs. She mentioned a drug dealer that he used named One Stop, who sold everything from cocaine to Plan B to birth control and just other drugs. She testified seeing him at the studio. She also said that Diddy carried a gun in his back pocket, which scared her. But the defense pounced on that, asking, "How many times did you see this gun? You worked with him for over a decade." And she basically said that she only saw that gun on his person 2 or 3 times. And then they pressed further. They said, "Did he take it out? Did he wave it around? Did he threaten you with it?" And Dawn said no to all of these claims. So the defense wrapped their recross by asking Dawn what she wanted from her civil suit, which was filed after Carrie Ventura's. And Dawn said she wants justice and compensation for her work with Diddy. And they pushed back, like, "So you want money?" And she would kind of say, "No, I want justice and compensation for XYZ." And they kind of would pounce on her and say, "Okay, so compensation is money." And then Dawn, who I felt like was just kind of done. I mean, you could tell she was like, "Okay, I really want this to be over." She just was like, "Okay, yes." But I was a little bit surprised. She didn't seem to know that much about her own civil suit. And I don't think she was being elusive. I really think she genuinely wasn't aware of what her attorneys wrote in the suit or what the demands were, or maybe she just didn't refresh her memory on the suit because they didn't think it was going to come up, some of the specifics. But also, I mean, how could you not think that this was going to come up? But anyway, Dawn finished her testimony, and then they moved on to the next witness, whose name is Carrie Morgan. And Carrie Morgan is Cassie Ventura's former best friend from 2001 to 2018. She was a former model, and she was the one that said, or Cassie said, that Diddy allegedly hit her over the head with a wooden hanger, and this was the incident that ended Cassie and Carrie's friendship. And Carrie was visibly reluctant to be there, though cooperative. You could tell, and she said this, she's moved on with her life, and, it seemed like she really didn't want to be dragged back into this. But her testimony focused on two main events, let's call them. One was a particularly terrible assault on Cassie by Diddy when they were in Jamaica. And Diddy had rented this mansion in Jamaica, and Cassie and Carrie Morgan and Diddy were all hanging out in the bar area of the mansion. I guess Cassie went to the bathroom and Diddy felt like she was taking too long. So he would call out for her, and then finally he just went looking for her. And Carrie Morgan describes then hearing an argument in the hallway. And then she describes hearing some noises, and then what she said was Cassie letting out a, quote, guttural, terrifying scream. And she then said that Cassie and Diddy went outside, and she followed them outside, and she saw Diddy shove Cassie where she hit the side of her temple, and she fell down. And Carrie Morgan described Cassie being in this fetal position, almost not moving for about 30 seconds. And she describes Cassie kind of, getting up finally and then just running, taking off. And then Carrie Morgan said she jumped into a golf cart, and then Diddy jumped into another golf cart, and they both went in opposite directions looking for Cassie. And then finally, Carrie Morgan was able to find Cassie. Cassie jumped in the golf cart, and Carrie Morgan says that they actually hid in a ditch for what felt like hours. I mean, very chilling, hiding from Diddy and some of the bodyguards because they could feel them drive back and forth looking for them. And this next, quote, event, I was really surprised about. I had no idea this happened. And this is the same day in 2016 that the Intercontinental Hotel beatdown occurred. Now, Carrie was at Cassie's house when Cassie came home after that beatdown. She described Cassie as just kind of despondent, had the black eye, came home, and dropped her bags down. And Carrie said about 30 minutes later, Diddy showed up at Cassie's apartment banging on the door outside with a hammer. And somehow, about 3 hours later, the police show up at Cassie's house. And it was later assumed that somebody in the building had called the police because of a noise complaint, because of the hammer. But Carrie testified she wasn't really sure how the police showed up. So again, it was about 3 hours later, they arrived, and Carrie said they pushed her against the wall when she opened the door, the police. They asked for IDs, and Carrie gave hers, but Cassie refused, saying she didn't have her ID. And Carrie Morgan said the police were kind of right in front of Cassie, asking her questions while she was on the couch. I believe she said she had her hood up, but they could still see this black eye visible. And the police left a detective card, and then they left. They departed. And then we were shown a Cellbrite extraction of a communication between Carrie Morgan and Christina Courtroom, Diddy's chief of staff, where Carrie sent a picture of the detective's card. And in the messages, Carrie just seemed a bit overwhelmed, and she was kind of like, look, I'm not used to all of this. This is really intense. It seemed like we were shown that text message just to kind of highlight the fact that maybe this isn't super normal behavior. But then we have the cross-examination of Carrie Morgan, and this was done by Diddy's attorney, Mark Agnifilo. And his style, by the way, is very conversational. He's not slick or aggressive. And he often kind of tags his questions with phrases like, I'm just trying to understand. Or he even jokes with the witnesses. And he joked with Carrie saying, I'll try to get you out of here quickly so you can enjoy the sunshine. But he started by addressing Carrie's direct testimony, where she claimed that Diddy controlled Cassie's life and career, often stifling her music output, or that's what it seemed like. And Agnifilo kind of countered, saying, well, didn't Diddy put Cassie in the studio with some big names like Kid Cudi, Lil Wayne? And she didn't really remember Lil Wayne or Kid Cudi, but she did remember Fabulous, Too Tall, and French Montana. And she remembered this mixtape. And when she talked about this mixtape, by the way, Diddy kind of subtly shook his head at that mention. I remember looking right at him. And then Agnifilo revisited the two key incidents that Carrie had described. Now, first, the March 6th, 2016 incident where Diddy allegedly was banging on Cassie's door with a hammer in LA. Agnifilo asked if anyone took photos of the door or if the police, who arrived 3 hours later, said anything about the door, or if they saw Cassie's injury and did anything about that. And Carrie said the police saw Cassie on the couch with the black eye, but they didn't file a report because Cassie wouldn't give her ID or her name, claiming she lost it. And, there's no photos because there's no report. So Agnifilo kind of was pressing the incident, kind of minimizing the severity. And, I noticed that at this point in time, I was looking over at the jury. They didn't really react much to the violence that was being described. So I was thinking, are they becoming desensitized? Are they listening intently? Do they not care? I have no idea, but they are so hard to read. Another incident was brought up. Let's call this a third incident, the wooden hanger moment that ended Carrie and Cassie's friendship. Carrie testified that Diddy walked into Cassie's home in 2018 when she and Cassie were at the table, and he said something like, who's she cheating with? Who's she cheating with? And then he grabbed Carrie by the throat, according to her, and hit her on the head with a wooden hanger. And as a side note, when Cassie was testifying about this, she had said that she and Diddy had broken up. They were on again, off again, but they were off at this point, and she was dating her now husband, Alex Fine. But I did notice that Mark Agnifilo got Carrie Morgan to say at least twice that Cassie was, quote, cheating on Diddy at this point, and she didn't know, which is why Diddy, bursting into Cassie's apartment, acting irate like that, really caught her by surprise. Now, Carrie said that she went to urgent care, though a government transcript said hospital, and they were kind of trying to get her on that, the defense, but she clarified, look, it's the same thing. However, no photos were taken of her injury. The defense made sure that we knew that. And Agnifilo had also highlighted a discrepancy where Cassie had testified that there were drugs on the table, and Carrie denied it. But why did Diddy attacking Carrie Morgan, why did this end Cassie and Carrie's friendship? Well, according to Carrie Morgan, Cassie took Diddy's side. She acted like this wasn't a big deal, like Carrie was overreacting, and Carrie contacted a lawyer about this, and she was going to sue them. And later, Carrie describes that Cassie contacted her, and they met at a pizza place, and Cassie basically offered, and we're assuming through Diddy, $30,000 in cash, and then to sign an NDA on Diddy's behalf so no lawyers could be involved. And Carrie accepted this, and she dropped her plan to sue. We didn't exactly see the physical NDA, but Carrie Morgan was very believable, very credible in my opinion, and this alleged betrayal by Cassie, according to Carrie, or what Carrie considered a betrayal, is what ended their friendship. And, it was kind of odd when Agnifilo at the end of his cross was kind of asking why they hadn't reconnected. Since Cassie had moved on, she has her own beautiful family now. And Carrie was kind of like, well, she could have called me too, and then made this guess that Cassie's number had changed. So I'm kind of like, why do we need to hear this? This seems a little gossipy, but yeah. And then the defense also hammered Carrie on Cassie's alleged jealousy, with Carrie confirming that Cassie was envious of Diddy's relationship with Kim Porter, especially over the New Year's Eve party he would have, because Cassie wasn't ever able to attend that because Kim Porter also attended. Agnifilo also brought up Gina, and Gina was another woman that Diddy dated. And I believe I brought this up on my first recap, but she was rumored to be victim 4 in the case. And Carrie called Gina, quote, the big problem that wouldn't go away, and then referred to her as, quote, a little girl, before correcting herself, like, oh no, she's an adult, because Mark Agnifilo was like, okay, why did you call her a little girl? That's kind of weird. She's an adult. And Carrie's like, no, she was just a lot younger than us. But in a very surprising slip, Carrie revealed that at one point Gina got pregnant, which caused a huge problem. But that also caused a really awkward moment in the courtroom, as Mark Agnifilo was kind of like, and quickly moved on. So that was the recap of Carrie Morgan's testimony. And then the day wrapped with the direct testimony of David James, Diddy's personal assistant from May 2007 to May 2009. I felt like when David walked into the courtroom, he looked a little bit nervous. And at one point, he even teared up during his direct testimony because he recalled his interview with Bad Boy Records HR head, someone named Vashta, who pointed to a picture of Diddy and said, "This is Mr. Combs' kingdom. We are here to serve him." And literally, this was during his interview at Bad Boy. But David described his grueling schedule, 8 a.m. to 4 a.m. some days, for $70,000 a year, plus some overtime. We didn't get the exact number there. But he talked about his duties, which included arriving at Diddy's house before he woke, setting out business documents, calendars, bookings, turning the TV on to Diddy's preferred channel, coordinating with the chef for breakfast, and accompanying Diddy to meetings, dinners, and studio sessions. And he also mentioned a few things like seeing security guards, carrying knives, and being told to, quote, stay in his lane when he asked too many questions. David also spoke about Cassie, saying that she confided in him during a trip to Miami, telling him, whoa, this lifestyle's crazy. He suggested that she leave, but she said that she couldn't. I mean, Diddy essentially paid for her career, her home, her salary, according to David. He also talked about advancing rooms for Diddy, and advancing rooms can mean anything from a green room at the Ellen Show to a hotel, setting it up to his liking. And so he talked about buying snacks for Diddy, like Jell-O and applesauce. I thought this was really weird, but apparently Diddy likes applesauce on his cheeseburgers. I mean, really, the government should add a charge to the indictment because that is a crime itself. No, I'm just kidding. But David James said that when he would pick up certain things for Diddy, he would use his own credit card and then he would expense it, and he would get money from Bad Boy after doing this expense report. However, he described when he had to pick up items like baby oil, Astroglide, condoms, he was told not to expense this through Bad Boy. He would pay for it and then he would get cash from security. The government made sure to highlight this fact. I go back and forth about this because I was kind of thinking, okay, they almost want this as an admission of guilt. Like, this stuff, baby oil, Astroglide, this is connected to his alleged sex crimes. But I guess you could also counter that and say, well, look, he just didn't want personal items bought through Bad Boy. Who knows? All right, so the next day, we ended that day with David James. The next day, day 7, it started again with David James finishing his direct testimony. And just a side note, this was the morning that Diddy walked into the courtroom in really good spirits. He turned to the public section in the courtroom and he made a heart gesture, and this woman returned it. I was like, man, people still really love him. So yes, okay, we pick up with the direct examination of David James, and he revealed that he was forced to take polygraph tests or lie detector tests twice. once when Cassie's love bracelet went missing, and then again when Diddy had a watch disappear. And he describes being very terrified taking these tests. And he said that, he didn't really feel like he had a choice in the matter. He had to take them. And so he passed the first test with flying colors, but admitted during the second test about this watch, he described essentially having a guilty conscience because he had stolen a pair of Sean John jeans and a bottle of Ciroc. So yeah, that made him nervous. He also said that when these items went missing, on one occasion he was off and he was at a hotel room with his girlfriend, and one of the security guards came in his room and searched through all of their belongings to try to find this missing item. David James also testified about a tense moment in January 2009 at Diddy's house. Diddy and Cassie returned from a club, and Diddy was irate over a blog post claiming that Cassie was hit at the club by Diddy, and he kind of accused David of leaking it. And David James said that Diddy kind of pushed him aside when he was on the computer and searched his browser history. And David just said that he was a little bit jarred by this. He also described one New Year's Eve he was off and Diddy invited him to the New Year's Eve party, and David said that he stole a pill of MDMA from Diddy's Louis Vuitton med bag, and he described himself as kind of bopping around the party, but he said he was, quote, Diddy bopping, and Diddy in the courtroom actually laughed at this. But he said the next day when he was working, Diddy called him into his office, and Diddy was watching footage from the party because I guess at this point in time, he filmed all of his parties. But Diddy spotted David and said, "Oh, there you are." And then he asked David if he was on drugs, and David admitted it and said yes. And Diddy said something like, "I'm going to keep this in case I need it." And then David also described a hotel incident where he delivered an iPad or food to Diddy and Cassie, and no one answered at the time, but he was called to deliver this food or this iPod or iPad. So he used his key to enter. And he said that he saw Cassie on her back in bed with the covers all pulled up, but not looking like she was sleeping. I think he was kind of hinting that she was on drugs. And then he said that he spotted a naked man with very long hair and very well endowed in the room. And then he thought that Diddy was in the shower because he heard the shower running and he didn't see him. But again, it was kind of like, okay, we're hinting that a freak off scenario occurred, corroborating all of the other witness testimony about this freak off. Then we heard about David James's version of Mel's Diner, the whole Suge Knight Mel's Diner incident that we previously heard from Cassie. And I did not realize that David James was there for this. David James said that he was instructed, along with D-Rock, to go pick up cheeseburgers for Cassie and Diddy. So David James was driving, D-Rock was in the passenger seat, and they get into the parking lot, and D-Rock spots Suge Knight. So D-Rock gets out of the car and walks around to Suge's car, where Suge is still in the passenger seat of that car, and he introduces himself as, quote, Biggie's boy. And Suge's like, "Oh yeah, okay, but what are you doing in my city?" And D-Rock said something like, "Oh, getting that money." So David James then says that he and D-Rock go inside to pick up the cheeseburgers, and it's glass, so he can kind of see outside and they can look outside. And he describes that there were 4 SUVs that kind of pulled up in each corner of the parking lot, and that D-Rock said that he saw someone hand Suge Knight a gun. He then describes feeling a little bit of panic from D-Rock, but they jump back in the car. They return to Diddy's house. It's clear that they are fearing some trouble, where Diddy and Cassie were arguing outside. And they tell Diddy what's going on. Diddy then instructed David and D-Rock to get into another SUV. I guess they were in a silver SUV before, and Diddy wanted them to get into one that was black with tinted windows. So they get in the car. David James is driving, D-Rock is in the passenger seat, and James says that Diddy is in the back with 3 handguns on his lap. So they get back to Mel's diner, and apparently Suge was gone when they arrived. And David James said that he was instructed to kind of drive around for a while. They didn't find anything, so they returned home. But James testified that he was so shaken up about that incident that he quit right after that. And he actually gave 6 months notice to HR at Bad Boy. And I guess Bad Boy was like, oh, well, do you want to work somewhere else at Sean John, another department? And he was like, nope, I'm good. Good luck and goodbye. One last thing about his direct testimony, the government elicited some testimony from him where he overheard Diddy talking about Cassie and Kim Porter to somebody when someone said, oh, how's Cassie? How's Kim? And he said, Kim is my queen. She's in LA taking care of the family. And then he said something along the lines of, Cassie is right where I want her. She's easily moldable. Now, on cross-examination, which was done by Mark Agnifilo, it was really interesting. And I feel like there's more coming or maybe not about this incident or why he pressed this so hard. But he kept pressing David on the Mel's Diner timeline, asking, are you sure you drove D-Rock to Diddy's house? And he's like, yeah, I'm sure. And he's like, so Diddy didn't have to go pick up D-Rock at Mel's. And David James was like, that would be crazy. I am sure we drove back together. And Agnifilo also asked why David wasn't scared to testify about any of this stuff now, to which David revealed that he had a proffer agreement granting him immunity. And also, I felt like he got this proffer agreement because he admitted during direct examination to buying drugs for Diddy's friends. And, buying drugs, that's a crime. So, yeah. David also admitted during the cross-examination that he respected Diddy as a businessman and he loved Sean John. He also described Bad Boy as, quote, one big family, and that Diddy's mom, Janice Combs, referred to David James as her, quote, son. And in kind of a lighter moment, and it was basically at the end of his testimony, Mark Agnifilo was like, so, do you remember when you and Roger Bonds brought back prostitutes to Diddy's home? And he was like, well, I didn't know that she was a prostitute. I was like, okay. But he said, oh, I didn't know she was a prostitute. And, this was all Roger Bonds. It wasn't really me. But I guess when they were back at Diddy's house, this prostitute asked David James for a shower. And he was kind of like, okay, you can shower for $20 or $200, whatever he said. And it was kind of just a funny moment. And then he was done the cross-examination. And I did notice that when he was leaving the stand, he gave Diddy a head nod. And Diddy gave one back. Next up for the government was witness Cassie's mother, Regina Ventura, and she took the stand very briefly. She described the threatening email that Cassie sent her while she was dating Kid Cudi in 2011, where Cassie detailed Diddy's alleged threats to release sex tapes of Cassie and harm both her and Kid Cudi if they didn't comply with whatever Diddy was demanding. And Regina Ventura revealed that Diddy allegedly demanded $20,000 from Cassie's parents, and that forced them to take out a second mortgage to pay him. And this money was returned 45 days later, she said. So although we didn't see a paper trail, this clearly was hinting at possible extortion. She also recounted an incident in LA that we heard about through Cassie, where Diddy took Cassie's phone, leading to this argument outside of Cassie's building. And Regina Ventura described trying to intervene here, and she said she was screaming at Diddy outside. She was trying to pounce on him and punch him and get Cassie's phone. And she said she was doing this all while Cassie was inside the apartment. So she said that after she kind of lunged at Diddy, he did return Cassie's phone, but he left with Cassie's car. And that was the extent of her direct testimony, and I thought that the defense wisely chose not to cross-examine her. The next witness was a male stripper turned escort, I suppose. His name is Sheree Hayes, aka The Punisher. Again, a male stripper from a website called Hunkamania, and he actually is now a partner in Hunkamania. And he also had his own website called thepunisher.com, where he advertised himself as a stripper or entertainer for bachelorette parties and other events. And he met Cassie and Diddy the same way another escort, Daniel Phillip, did. Cassie called the business that he worked at for a quote bachelorette party, and this was at the Trump Hotel. This was where the Punisher was sent in New York City. And Cassie said, again, it was her birthday or she was doing something with her girlfriends. And then when he got to the hotel, Cassie answered the door in a robe and said, my husband wants something special, so can you help me, quote, set the mood or set the room? And she gave him $100 cash, and she just kind of said, what I want you to do is rub baby oil all over me. And he described that he saw baby oil in these bowls of water. And he said when they were doing this, that Diddy emerged from another room, and his face was covered, that he could only see his eyes. And then he directed the two of them for a bit while masturbating. And this is a pattern that we've heard before. And he also noted, Hayes, or the Punisher noted, that at times Cassie seemed to sigh at some of Diddy's directions, like it was a job. And he also said that this particular time, this session, the first time, he didn't finish. The Punisher didn't finish. And Cassie asked him if he wanted to, and he said no. And then she gave him an additional amount of cash, and he left. And, he talked about his times with Cassie and Diddy. He would, go back and do these sessions. I believe it was 7 or 8 more times. But he also revealed that he did experience erectile dysfunction. And this was kind of crazy because Daniel Phillip also testified experiencing erectile dysfunction. However, Daniel Phillip, his ED came from witnessing the violence that Diddy exercised on Cassie. And the Punisher said, he's always kind of dealt with this. So it turns out he wrote a book, a self-help book in 2022, and it's called In Search of Freezer Meat. And this title drew some laughs in court when Diddy's attorney, Xavier McDonald, was cross-examining him. And he kind of was like, oh, freezer meat, like hard meat? And everybody laughed. But of the book's 182 pages, 6 pages mentioned his experiences with Cassie and Diddy, although he did not mention them by name. He called them, quote, a wealthy married couple. And he did say he exaggerated a little bit just for the book. But on cross, Donaldson confirmed that neither Hunkamania nor Hayes' website offered sex work. And Hayes, the Punisher, insisted he wasn't a sex worker. He actually called his strip teases that he did while he was stripping, quote, professional dry humps. Then the defense got him to testify that Cassie appeared to be enjoying herself to a degree during their 8 to 10 encounters, particularly, in one instance where she, quote, scooted forward, meaning she wanted to engage further in sexual activity without Diddy's direction. A lot of the time she would wait for direction, and this time in particular, he testified that she scooted forward, and then Diddy kind of gave a nod, like, oh yeah, go ahead and enjoy yourself. And Donaldson also noted that Hayes, the Punisher, was also paid for his time, not just his, quote, services, as evidenced by a $500 payment when Cassie canceled a session. So just a side note, the testimony from the Punisher, I kind of expected a lot more, but really it was just more corroboration that he engaged in freak-offs with Cassie and Diddy, and the defense, again, elicited testimony that would make Cassie look like a willing participant. So each side did their job there, and again, with a name like the Punisher, I kind of expected a lot more. But we ended that day with testimony from Special Agent Gerard Gannon from Homeland Security Investigations in Miami, who participated in the March 2024 search of Diddy's Star Island home. And he walked us through the layout, which it was crazy big. And it showed photos of the second floor and a closet containing 2 AR-15s. The upper and lower receivers were separated, and the magazines were also separated, but they had 19 and 10 rounds in each of the magazines, respectively. We saw 7-inch platform heels, condoms, sex toys, lingerie, and a mini crate of baby oil and Astroglide. And one AR-15 had a red dot optic for better targeting, and both were defaced, making them hard to trace. His testimony ended that day, and we began finishing his testimony on day 8, or his direct testimony. So he then showed us each pair the next morning, each pair of 7-inch platform heels, including these red ones that he displayed on the witness stand. And that was pretty wild to see a special agent hold up these crazy red platform heels. We also saw Balenciaga boots that contained 3 different cell phones, and a 4th phone was found in another bedroom. And then we saw a Gucci bag on a dresser. And then we saw the contents of what was in the Gucci bag. And that included a rolled up $100 bill, various pills, pink, yellow, orange, white, powder, rocks, and eye drops. And it turns out those eye drops were laced with MDMA residue. And the pills tested positive for cocaine, ketamine, and MDMA, with 3 orange tablets bearing a Tesla symbol on them, and Xanax. And in the bathroom, there was a wooden box inscribed with, quote, Puffy, and that was on the top of it, and like this, on this gold plaque. And that contained mushroom pills and MDMA crystal rocks. And then there was another closet in this bathroom that held 25 bottles of baby oil, 31 bottles of Astroglide, and I also saw 2 rubber duckies. And Gannon clarified that this wasn't all the baby oil that they found. Of course, we saw the mini crate the day before, but the government did reference the indictment throughout all of this so they could go through and make sure all of the evidence matched up. Now, we then went to the guest house, and there was a red suitcase that held a .45 caliber gun, which was not defaced, a magazine, and a box of bullets, originally containing 50 bullets with 41 remaining. And then Gannon walked the handgun up and down the jury for a closer look. I noticed that he hadn't done that with any other piece of evidence except for this one gun. Well, on cross, Diddy's attorney, Tenny Garagos, revealed that the HSI investigation into Combs began on November 17th, 2023. And she really emphasized the scale of the search. She made sure to let us know that the special agent waited until Diddy was on some kind of trip with his daughters to do the search and seizure of the house. So he was gone. And she was like, so you had 80 to 90 agents perform this search. Okay. And he's like, yeah. And then she noted that they also had a boat come in. And so she said, okay, so you did this search by land and by sea, just really suggesting overreach. And she noted that 6 people were on the property, a music manager, a house manager, and some cleaning staff, and they were all handcuffed. And she said, so you handcuffed these people for over an hour. And he's like, well, only one of them was handcuffed for about an hour or longer because they weren't too happy. And she was like, oh, because they were handcuffed? And he was like, well, yes. And then she reiterated that no drugs or weapons were found on them. And she also highlighted that the AR-15s that were shown to the jury were assembled, but when they were found by HSI at Diddy's house, they were separated. She also noted that HSI took after photos and not before photos, which raised some questions about the evidence placement. And then she pointed to a photo of Diddy's bedroom with some messed up pillows and some just damaged gates at the property, again, noting the lack of before photos. And she also made sure to highlight in the indictment that almost all of the drugs they found were able to be destroyed because they were such a little amount of drugs. And then she ended her cross basically by asking Gannon if Floridians kept guns at home. And he said yes, and he admitted that he did too. Next, we heard from a forensic psychologist, Dr. Dawn Hughes. And if you know that name, Dr. Dawn Hughes, she testified in the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial, and she testified about trauma. And she has, 30 years of experience, and she discussed why victims stay, how they cope, patterns of disclosure, and memory. She explained power dynamics, psychological, sexual, and emotional abuse, love bombing, and coping strategies like drug use to suppress memories. And she talked a lot about trauma bonding as well, where victims form attachments to their abusers, and also how PTSD can affect memory recovery, often triggered by sensory cues. And she is a blind expert, not having treated Cassie, and also disclosed her $6,000 a day daily rate with no outcome-based payment. On cross, Diddy's new attorney that I hadn't seen before, Jonathan Bach, he focused on Hughes' lack of direct knowledge of Cassie, suggesting that this testimony she was giving was too general. And then he referenced a 2010 webinar that Hughes co-led on, quote, expert witness testimony in domestic violence cases, accusing her of training people on how to testify. And Hughes clarified that it was about courtroom conduct, not testimony coaching, and she reviewed a physical copy of the webinar document, saying she didn't really recall it. And this was a huge point of contention, it seemed. There were so many sidebars, so many objections during her direct testimony, as well as the cross, basically because of what would be allowed in and what would be fair, considering she didn't treat Cassie. And then at one point, Bach wanted this webinar shown to the jury, and the judge was like, no, if she needs to see it, she can just reference it herself, a handheld copy. The jury doesn't need to see this. So Bach also noted that 60% of Dr. Hughes' income comes from court work and 40% comes from treating patients, and then suggested or questioned her 6 to 8 meetings with the government as a, quote, blind expert, suggested her bias. And Hughes was like, no, I'm not working in favor of anyone. I'm working in favor of science. And he said, well, science isn't paying you. The DOJ is paying you. And then on redirect, the government highlighted that Hughes had worked for the defense before, even for one of Diddy's attorneys. And that was kind of a moment. And then Bach gets up and you're like, oh boy, which attorney was it and what happened? Well, we find out that Brian Steele had once contacted Dr. Hughes for a case. And Bach said, well, isn't it true that Brian Steele contacted you about a case where a woman shot her husband in the head 5 times, and she said that she was a victim of domestic violence? And Dr. Hughes was like, I'm not comfortable talking about this because I didn't testify in that case. And then Bach said something along the lines of, yeah, that's right, because Brian Steele didn't hire you. So that was quite a moment for everybody in the courtroom. It was a little salty. And as a side note, Diddy's sons, Justin and Christian, they arrived in court that day a little bit late. And so all eyes were kind of on them. They arrived in the middle of Dr. Hughes's testimony. And Diddy turned around and spoke to them very briefly. He kind of, he didn't really smile, in the moment. He gave a head nod, and then he said something to them just along the lines of that he's okay and he hopes that they're okay. Now, that day ended with another former assistant, George Kaplan. Kaplan worked at Combs Enterprises from December 2013 to December 2015, initially as an executive assistant to the COO, before being promoted in September of 2014 to Diddy's executive assistant. And just note that he did quit a few months later. He also described a pretty grueling schedule, 80 to 100 hours a week, earning about $120,000 over the course of 15 months. He said his days often ran from 9:30 a.m. to as late as 4 a.m., especially during late studio recording sessions, though he emphasized that nothing salacious was happening, it was just work. And his duties included carrying and packing Diddy's bags, getting him to meetings, setting up hotel rooms in different cities like LA, New York, Miami, often at familiar spots that we've heard before, like the Trump Hotel in New York and the Intercontinental in LA. And George Kaplan, again, corroborated earlier testimony about Diddy's hotel habits, booking rooms under aliases like Frank Black, a nod to Biggie's alias, Frank White, by the way. I don't think I said that. He also said he'd pack his Diddy's hotel bags with baby oil, candles, and Diddy's clothes, and that he often had to clean up the hotel rooms afterward to, quote, preserve Diddy's reputation because there would be baby oil everywhere on the bed, the table, even the floor. And Kaplan also spoke about handling 2 different drug purchases for Diddy using cash and a contact number that was provided to him by Diddy. And he received immunity through a proffer agreement for this, which is similar to David James. And before he got this immunity or proffer agreement, I overheard some of the attorneys talking about the fact that he may end up pleading the fifth, but clearly that didn't happen. He also mentioned seeing Diddy's Louis Vuitton med bag, which contained prescriptions like, Diddy's normal prescriptions, but also had Tylenol and Advil. And he also remembers seeing ketamine and MDMA, which Kaplan himself had bought for Diddy. He testified, the MDMA. Now, on day 9, Kaplan finished his testimony, and he also got cross-examined, but he spoke about an incident with Cassie, and this incident happened on a private jet. He heard glass breaking from the back of the jet, and he didn't see anything, but he heard Cassie shout, "Isn't anybody seeing this?" And when Diddy emerged from this area, he instructed everyone not to go back to see Cassie or help her in any way. And again, Kaplan didn't see anything, but he did see her after. And apparently she had some kind of a black eye, and he was instructed later to get an anti-inflammatory medication for Cassie. And Kaplan said he recalled fetching witch hazel to help her. Now, after this incident, he gave his 3-month notice, citing his father's prostate cancer as a reason to leave, but clearly this incident shook him. Now, surprisingly, he still expressed respect for Diddy, saying he learned a strong work ethic from him that he applies today, even giving Diddy the same head nod that David James gave him as he exited the stand. So that was interesting. I didn't feel like his testimony did that much damage except for the drug talk and then corroborating more abuse of Cassie Ventura. Now, next up was the highly anticipated testimony of Scott Mescudi, aka Kid Cudi. And, you could tell he didn't necessarily want to be there, but he was very credible. He strolled in wearing a black leather jacket, white shirt, jeans, and an earring. Not the usual suit we've seen from most witnesses. He also yawned a few times on the stand. But, I thought it was interesting because Diddy didn't really look at him as he approached the stand. He just kind of leaned back in his chair. But Kid Cudi testified about his year-long relationship with Cassie in 2011, during which he believed that Cassie and Diddy were, quote, fully off, though their on-again, off-again status was murky. He said he met Cassie while working on music together, and he admitted to falling in love with her, which was a sweet moment in the testimony. But things took a turn when Diddy found out about their relationship, which Cassie discussed on the stand through an email on Cassie's phone to, I think it was between Capricorn Clark and Cassie about a toiletries bag. And Diddy freaked out about this. And so that same night, Kid Cudi recounted in December 2011, Cassie called him, very panicked, very upset, saying Diddy knew about them, and she asked Kid Cudi to come and get her. So he took her to the Sunset Marquis Hotel just to keep her off the radar, but somehow, Kid Cudi speculated Cassie might have felt forced. Diddy got Kid Cudi's home address, again from Cassie. So while Cassie and Kid Cudi were at the hotel, Capricorn Clark, who was Diddy's assistant / marketing manager, She was very close to Cassie. She called them, and she was Kid Cudi put her on speakerphone, and she called them from Kid Cudi's driveway in a car. She revealed that Diddy and an associate had woken her up, taken her out of bed, and forced her to Kid Cudi's house, where they essentially broke in and they were inside. And Kid Cudi was furious, and he leaves. He's going back to his house from the hotel, and he called Diddy, and he said that he kind of yelled, "Mother effer, why are you in my house?" And Diddy calmly replied, I just want to talk to you," and said he was waiting for him. So Kid Cudi gets to his house. He noticed his security cameras were kind of tilted downward, which is unusual for the normal position. And inside, he didn't find anyone. He found Christmas presents for his family from Chanel that were opened on the kitchen table, and his dog was locked behind the bathroom door. And he said that his dog later showed signs of PTSD from this incident. So Kid Cudi called the police, and they made a report about the break-in. And from there, nothing really seemed to happen. He returned to Cassie, who was very stressed, and then she left for Connecticut for the holidays. And Kid Cudi, met her in Connecticut and spent a few days with Cassie and her family. And while he was there, Diddy kept texting him saying, "I just want to get to the bottom of this. I was in the dark about all this stuff." And Kid Cudi didn't respond. However, Cassie broke up with him before the New Year's, and then she went to see Diddy in Arizona and didn't tell anyone, including her family. So a month later, it's January 2012. Kid Cudi and Cassie are no longer together. He says he's about 45 minutes away from his house, but his dog sitter called him around 6:30 a.m. to report that his Porsche was on fire. And it turns out that a Molotov cocktail had been thrown through the roof, charring the interior. We saw photos of the side door, of the inside of the car, and I mean, it was a wreck. And Kid Cudi called the police, and the police, they came. He filed a report, and it was very upsetting. So a few days later, Kid Cudi, or maybe it was the same day, I didn't quite catch that, but he finally reached out to Diddy, and he was like, "Okay, we need to talk and settle this." So they met at the Soho House in LA, and he tells us that D-Rock, the bodyguard, leads him to the 7th floor to this meeting room. And Cassie wasn't there initially, but Kid Cudi described a very surreal scene. He said that Diddy stood by these glass windows with his hands behind his back, and his exact words were, he was looking like a Marvel supervillain, and that definitely got a chuckle from the courtroom. And he said that Diddy was bizarrely calm, offering Kid Cudi water twice. And they discussed the situation. Kid Cudi apologized, saying that he didn't know that Diddy and Cassie were still dating. And then they shook hands. And Kid Cudi said that as their hands were clasped, he asked Diddy, "What about my car?" And Diddy replied, "I don't know what you're talking about," which Kid Cudi interpreted as a lie. So he kind of walked away, and Diddy was like, "Wait, I thought we were cool." And he's kind of just like, "Yeah, we are, but you're a liar." And so years later, Kid Cudi said he didn't talk to him until years later at the same Soho House. He saw Diddy and his daughters there. And he said Diddy apologized to him for everything that happened in the past. The cross-examination was done by Diddy's attorney, Brian Steele, and he really lightened the mood. He complimented Kid Cudi's talent, getting him to smile, and then he pressed on the car fire police report, noting that the fingerprints and DNA that were found specifically were from a woman. And it was a moment because Kid Cudi said he wasn't aware of that, or the police never followed up. And Steele also highlighted that the quote-unquote break-in, Kid Cudi's door was wide open with no forced entry. And he also got Kid Cudi to admit that he thought Cassie had, quote, played both him and Diddy by misleading them about her relationship status. And Kid Cudi confirmed that Cassie told him about the physical violence that she experienced from Diddy, but not about the sexual violence. And he said he never witnessed any of that himself. And there was also a funny moment during a sidebar, or it was after a sidebar, when Kid Cudi actually just tried to speak. And he kind of talked in the microphone when they were walking away from the sidebar. And he's like, Mr. Steele, I just want to correct something that I said. And the judge quickly was like, no, you can't. It was really funny. He was like, oh, sorry. But yes, but that was Kid Cudi. And as soon as Kid Cudi testified, you could see kind of the courtroom clear out because a lot of people were very interested in that. And then after lunch, the afternoon session, it was a bit shorter. We got out early that day. We heard from Mila Morales, who is a celebrity makeup artist and friend of Cassie's, who described her as, quote, a little sister. Morales testified about an altercation that she heard but didn't see between Cassie and Diddy before the 2010 VMAs while they were in adjoining hotel rooms. And after this incident, she asked Cassie if she wanted to go to the hospital, but Cassie declined. And Morales had Cassie sleep over at her house multiple times. They were very close. At one point, she called one of her doctor friends to check on Cassie's head and even got one of her lawyer friends to speak with Cassie, but nothing ever came of that. And on cross, Diddy's attorney, Anna Estevao, focused on Morales' her media involvement, noting that she had done 8 interviews and 2 documentaries, and she sold photos of Kim Porter for $1,000 and received $250 from a documentary for therapy reimbursement. Estevao also asked if Morales had requested another interview or asked permission from the government to do another interview, like Dateline. And Morales, she kind of looked at the transcript and she still kind of denied it. And that was that. It was pretty fast. And then we heard from Frederick Demore, the general manager of the La Hermitage Hotel in Beverly Hills. He gave a very brief testimony with no cross-examination. He detailed how Diddy's rooms were booked often by someone named, quote, Ryan Lopez, and then it would be changed to different aliases like Frank Black, Frank White, or Jackie Starr, one of Cassie's aliases, which we've heard corroborated before. And the hotel kept detailed profile notes for returning guests, and Diddy's were telling, and again, they corroborated what we've heard before. They noted that the staff should possibly authorize an extra $1,000 for room damages or a deep clean. Why? Because Diddy's stays left behind excessive amounts of oil, candle wax on carpets and nightstands, and a, quote, very strong smell that required putting the room out of order for cleaning. The notes also mentioned that Diddy's preferences for the room included fruit, water, and chocolate, and a room temperature set to a very toasty 75 degrees. Again, more corroboration with baby oil and candle use. And again, he didn't even get cross-examined because it was just so quick, and it was, again, just about what was in his hotel rooms. Now, the final witness of the day on day 9 was Special Agent Joshua Croft from HSI's computer forensics team, who analyzed 3 devices belonging to Cassie Ventura, a 2010 MacBook Pro, a MacBook Air, and another MacBook Pro of an unknown year, which was damaged with a broken CD drive. And Croft detailed his process, explaining the tools he used, like Celebrite, Axiom, for those tech nerds out there, and how he extracted data while maintaining the chain of custody. He clarified that HSI initially didn't have a search warrant for these devices because they had Cassie's consent to access them. He walked us through what consent means in this context, and essentially, again, Cassie voluntarily allowed the search. So on the 2010 MacBook Pro, Croft removed the hard drive, extracted that data that hadn't been wiped or overwritten, and processed it fairly easily. The MacBook Air, the login screen for that device showed a guest user and a Frank Black user. Now, there was no data in the guest user account, but in the Frank Black account, they couldn't just go in there because that belongs to Diddy. So they later obtained a search warrant to access the Frank Black data, which Croft clarified on redirect. I'm having trouble saying all these words now, sorry. Croft clarified on redirect. Now, the third MacBook Pro, the broken one, had bad sectors on the hard drive due to physical damage, so Croft couldn't recover all the data, but he extracted what he could. Now, we don't know everything that was on these devices so far, or we think we don't. But he did discuss the chat messages pulled from these devices, a lot of which I believe we've seen on the courtroom screen so far. The text messages between Cassie and Diddy, Carrie Morgan, and you know, all of that. So we can assume a lot of the data did come from these computers. I just have a feeling there could be more. But again, he explained why we would see sometimes blank messages, duplicate messages, why extracted data can look funky. And he said that yes, this is all common, missing timestamps, but the raw data can be cross-checked for accuracy. And then on cross, Diddy's attorney, Tenny Garagos, she honed in on the MacBook Air, asking if HSI processed all the data from the device with Frank Black. And again, he reiterated that they only accessed that data after securing a warrant, which was established clearly for the record. Now, his testimony will set the stage for what we expect next week. We are expecting Capricorn Clerk, and we're expecting someone from the LAPD and the fire department. And I believe that the LAPD and the fire department are going to testify or hopefully show us some of the police reports that Kid Cudi filed. And Capricorn Clark, man, I have a feeling that she's going to have some crazy testimony because she worked for Diddy for so long and she was extremely close to Cassie Ventura. And also, she was allegedly kidnapped by Diddy in the middle of the night and forced to go to Kid Cudi's house. So yeah, we'll hear all about that during week 3. And that is it for week 2. That is my recap. Again, I try to be very unbiased, just give you all the facts. So if you don't like anything I said, I'm sorry. Again, I was just reporting everything that I could possibly write down and experienced in the courtroom. I will see you guys next week for a week 3 recap. In the meantime, head to Pop Crime TV, the Diddy trial playlist, or my ex at Conlin_Lauren, or my TikTok, Lauren Conlin 4, for all of the quote unquote real-time Diddy trial updates. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.